For more than 400 years, the Sasanian Persian Empire of Ardashir proved to be the only equal of Imperial Rome and nearly destroyed it, not long before meeting its own end. The Sassanian Persians viewed their empire as the restoration of the Achaemenid Persian Empire of their ancestors that had once been the undisputed master of much of the known world, until it was conquered by Alexander of Macedon, and following his death at a young age, much of this region was ruled by the descendants of Alexander's general, Seleucus. The Iranian plateau then fell under the control of the nomadic Parthian Arsacid dynasty. Although initially a Seleucid vassal, they later gained full autonomy and then took control over the remnants of their former master's empire, as they had been greatly weakened by conflict with Rome. Even though the Parthians were an Iranian-speaking people group, they initially ruled as Hellenistic-style kings, adopting Seleucid Greco-Persian court customs while still maintaining elements of a nomadic tribal government. Despite claiming to have restored the ancient Persian Empire, they were still viewed as foreigners by many of their subjects, especially in the Persian homeland of Pars in southern Iran, also known as Persis or Fars, which seems to have become a largely autonomous locally ruled province early on. The Parthians were satisfied as long as taxes were paid on time and men supplied to the army when needed on campaign, particularly horse archers and cataphract-heavy cavalry, forerunners of the later medieval knights. In the early 3rd century AD, the Parthian Arsacid dynasty was preoccupied with fending off Roman invasions and the disunity of the royal family, with the empire being split between two rival brothers, each claiming legitimacy. So it was of little importance to them when a local family of priests of the Fire Temple of Anahid first took control of one city in Persis, and over the following 2 decades, consolidated power over the whole province. This conquest was completed by Ardashir and had been initiated by his father. By the time the Parthians had realized that the House of Sassan, named after Ardashir's grandfather, had gathered too much power and would not be content to serve the Parthians as military governors, their initial responses were too little and too late. Ardashir defeated the nearby, ineffective, and poorly motivated local governors that were sent by the Parthians to bring him in line, and proceeded to annex their territory, rallying many local Persians to his cause. The Arsacid Great King, Artabanus V, then led the full force of the Parthian army to confront Ardashir at the Battle of Hormozd-Dagan, and was soundly defeated and killed in battle. Over the next 2 years, Ardashir firmly established his rule over the Iranian plateau, and was crowned Shahanshah, King of Kings, the first native Persian to hold that title since the days of Alexander's conquests, more than 500 years before. 3 years later, Ardashir had taken the Arabian coast of the Persian Gulf, and defeated Balash, the brother of Artabanus in Mesopotamia, bringing him into contact with Rome. In contrast to the Parthians, that preferred a defensive strategy against Rome, using hit-and-run cavalry tactics on the wide-open plains of Mesopotamia, the Sassanians took the fight to the Romans, confronting imperial legions with heavy cavalry. Ardashir battled the Romans off and on for the remainder of his reign, achieving more minor successes than failures, most notably sacking and destroying the wealthy and heavily fortified city of Hatra. He always campaigned with his son Shapur, who he made his co-ruler for the last 2 years of his reign, to ensure a smooth succession. Shapur and his successors would carry on Ardashir's plan of massive urbanization, building hundreds and perhaps thousands of cities during the Sassanian Empire, and built a vast system of dams, aqueducts, reservoirs, and cisterns to ensure these cities had a plentiful supply of fresh water, allowing for larger populations. Shapur's reign was long and eventful. He successfully campaigned in the east, annexing large portions of territory there. In the west, he conquered Armenia, a fiercely independent warlike kingdom that had often played the deciding factor in the balance of power between the Roman and Parthian empires, giving an edge to whatever side they had allied with. After defeating the Emperor Gordian, Shapur then negotiated peace on favorable terms with his successor, Philip the Arab. However, this peace would be short-lived, with Shapur campaigning deep into Syria, conquering many of its cities, including Antioch, one of the most wealthy and populous in the Roman Empire. The Emperor Valerian responded with a force of 70,000 men. He reconquered much of Syria, and he personally led them into slaughter, with almost the entire force being annihilated, which included the Praetorian Guard. The emperor, with a few remaining survivors, tried to negotiate but was captured instead, and was taken deep within Ardashir, where he lived out the rest of his life in captivity. With his exact fate and year of death unknown. This event sent the Roman Empire into shock and panic, and initiated a series of civil wars and rebellions. Shapur also brought back many thousands of Roman civilians from Syria to populate the newly built imperial cities throughout the southern portion of the empire, with artisans, skilled workers, and men fit for military service being particularly sought out for relocation while on campaign. Shapur greatly increased the size and centralization of the government. Many of the powerful familial clans and minor local shahs had essentially run most aspects of local government in Parthian times, and kept most of their previous privileges and duties to the Shah and Shah. However, the host of newly built cities and their income were property of the Shah and Shah. Governors, viceroys, and a host of other appointed officials managed these. Importantly, a standardized set of laws were implemented throughout the empire, and law schools set up to supply the many judges. Shapur's reign was characterized by toleration for the many religions within the empire, including the teachings of Mani, the prophet of the Gnostic-influenced Manichaeism, which aggressively challenged the beliefs of the older religions in the region, and was even welcomed in the royal court to share his beliefs. And although seeking to refute the teachings of the fire goddess Devanahid, which Shapur was the high priest, and the ancient Persian Zoroastrian faith, which he also widely promoted, Mani was allowed to preach throughout the empire, and gain many converts. Shapur appointed Hormizd, widely believed to have been his youngest son, to succeed him to the throne. His maternal grandfather had been a prestigious Parthian noble who was slain by Ardashir, and his appointment in part may have been to please the Parthian nobles who had joined the Sassanian cause a generation before, in addition to him being the most warlike and fiercely loyal to his father during his reign. During the short reign of Hormizd, he widely continued his father's policies, and was regarded as a good ruler. Strident competition between Mani and the Zoroastrian priest Kadir became one of the most hotly contested issues of the day. And after Hormizd died of an unknown cause, he was not succeeded by his son, but his brother, Bahram I. Mani was summoned to the court, and scolded for not providing any benefit to the empire, and was imprisoned. Bahram supported the short-lived Palmyran Empire and its empress in her struggle with Rome, but after Rome reconquered the territory, both sides were ready for a peace treaty, and Bahram died shortly after. His brother Narse, the king of Armenia, was passed over for his son Bahram II to succeed him. He was supported by Kadir in his ascension to the throne, and he fabulously rewarded him in return, giving him control over all the Anahid fire temples in the realm, with the Shah and Shah stepping down as high priest. He also made Kadir the supreme judge of the land, replacing the judges with Zoroastrian priests. In 283, Bahram was occupied with putting down a rebellion by his cousin in modern-day Afghanistan, when the Roman Emperor Carus took advantage of the situation and invaded Mesopotamia upon hearing news of the civil war. His campaign was successful, and it is believed he took the Sassanian capital of Ctesiphon for a short while, and was allegedly struck by lightning soon after, causing the Romans to withdraw, which allowed Bahram to reconquer Mesopotamia. The Armenians then revolted, and defeated 2 attempts by him to retake it. These defeats, along with temporarily losing the capital, severely damaged his reputation. And when his son, Bahram III, was appointed the next Shah and Shah, rebellion immediately broke out, and his grand-uncle Narse seized the throne. Seeking to legitimize his rule, Narse called a council of all the nobles, many of them family members, to vote on who should be the next Shah and Shah. He overwhelmingly won this vote. Narse spent nearly every year of his entire reign on campaign against Rome, and initially had great success, repelling a major Roman invasion and reconquering Armenia. He was then defeated by a combined Roman-Armenian force that captured his wife and several other of his family members. He then agreed to a peace treaty and relinquished all rights to Armenia in exchange for the return of his family members, and died soon after. Narse had returned to the policy of religious toleration of the first 2 Shah and Shahs. This was reversed by his son Hormizd II, who actively persecuted the Manichaeans, but was tolerant of Christians and even had a Jewish wife. He successfully put down rebellions throughout his reign, but was killed while hunting in the desert. Although Arabs were blamed, it is suspected that the nobility were the real perpetrators. The nobles killed his son, Adur Narse, who was accused of excessive cruelty and ruled not much longer than a month. One of his brothers was then blinded and another imprisoned, who was freed by his wife and escaped to the Roman capital of Constantinople. The Emperor Constantine built him a palace and his descendants served in the Roman army and government. Although Hormizd II still had several more sons who were not deemed a threat, the nobles elected Shapur II, Shahanshah, while still in his mother's womb, and legend claims that the royal crown was placed on her belly while still pregnant. The long reign of Shapur II is often called the First Sasanian Golden Age. Before he assumed full control of the empire at age 16, a mutually beneficial peace with Rome was maintained, as the Emperor Constantine was busy trying to stabilize an empire that had spent the previous century fighting a constant series of wars with itself, when not at war with the Sassanids. Using the rapidly growing Christian faith as a common unifying factor, Constantine was largely successful. Shapur was militarily successful in the north, south, east, and west of his realm. Nomadic Arab tribes that had raided southern Mesopotamia during Shapur's childhood were dealt with. Many thousands of Arab civilians, rather than being enslaved or slaughtered, were resettled within the Sasanian Empire, along the coast of the Persian Gulf, and also deep within the empire. The Kushan Shahs of the east were brought under more direct Sasanian control. A large supply of Indian elephants was also secured for the army. In the north, Transoxania and the land to its southwest had been inhabited by Iranian-speaking nomadic cultures for millennia. This situation changed with successive waves of Asiatic invaders likely related to the Huns. The Sassanids and Kittites slaughtered and/or absorbed the previous inhabitants of the region. After briefly clashing with the Sassanian army, Shapur convinced them to join his cause and hired them as mercenaries. The Kittite king and his son even joined Shapur's retinue and accompanied him on his campaigns against Rome, with the Romans greatly admiring their battle prowess and fearlessness in battle. In 363, the Roman Emperor Julian invaded Mesopotamia and was killed in a minor skirmish. After an indecisive battle, Rome's next emperor agreed to a humiliating treaty, acknowledging Sasanian authority over Armenia and the other smaller kingdoms of the Caucasus Mountain region, and handing over a large sum of gold. Shapur II also widely promoted the Zoroastrian faith throughout the empire, and imposed a heavy tax on Christians to discourage the spread of that faith, as they were increasingly feared as having a secret allegiance to Rome. The intermediate period following the First Sasanian Golden Age had several long-term trends. First was a lengthy peace with Rome negotiated by Ardashir II and ratified by his nephew Shapur III, with only small-scale wars with Rome taking place during this period, usually involving Armenia. The second trend was the growing power of the priesthood and the nobility, who murdered the first 6 Shahanshahs of the intermediate period, after they attempted to restrict their power. It is interesting to note that a noble outside of the House of Sassan never attempted to seize the throne for himself during this period. This is likely largely due to the fact that the majority of these noble houses, at least in part, trace their lineage back to the Parthians, who had supported Ardashir in the creation of the Sassanian Empire. These nobles probably surmised that if they could overthrow the popular House of Sassan that had brought so much internal stability, growth, and prosperity to the realm, they would be viewed as illegitimate usurpers by just about everyone, including the powerful Zoroastrian Persian priesthood, who oversaw much of the efficient revenue-generating bureaucracy. So the nobles and priesthood during this period generally conspired together to place which member of the House of Sassan they viewed would benefit them most on the throne. The third trend that intensified as this period went on were the waves of nomadic invasions from the northeast. The Sassanids and the Kittites, who had been allied with the Sassanians during the reign of Shapur II, were pushed south by a new people, the Hephthalites, who along with the Sassanians largely wiped them out, and the Hephthalites would become a much larger problem for the Sassanians than the earlier nomads had been. The Hephthalites gained control over a large portion of the east, and became kingmakers within the Sassanian Empire, helping Perez, who sought their assistance in overthrowing his brother, who they killed in battle. After being installed as Shahanshah, Perez then fought 3 wars with the Hephthalites who had been raiding his empire. He lost and was captured in the first, and then paid a large ransom. He lost and gave his children as captives in the second. In the third war, he was killed. The Hephthalites then invaded the Sassanian Empire, but were stopped by the nobleman Sukra, who then installed Balash, the brother of Perez, as Shahanshah of the empire. Perez's son Kavad then rebelled, and was unsuccessful. He then rebelled a second time, this time receiving assistance from the Hephthalites, and was successful. He then defeated, captured, and executed the nobleman Sukra, who had placed his uncle on the throne. The Zoroastrian priest Mazdak then came to Kavad's attention, which among other tenets preached the doctrine of redistribution of wealth of the nobility, which Kavad used as a potent tool, promoting and implementing Mazdak's beliefs, and taking away much of the nobility and clergy's lands. The nobility and the clergy did not take too kindly to this, and imprisoned Kavad in the ominously named Fortress of Oblivion, and placed his younger brother on the throne. Kavad then escaped the fortress prison, the second time he had done so, then went straight to the Hephthalites, who had been his childhood captors. And in exchange for a very large IOU, a very large Hephthalite army accompanied Kavad on a march straight to Ctesiphon, where they surrendered without a fight. Upon returning to power, Kavad reconciled with the noble houses. He would not redistribute their land and give it to the poor as he had previously proposed, but he would tax them, which they had previously been exempt from. After more than 60 years of no large-scale war with Rome, Kavad waged war on them, with little territorial change. But in the treaty concluding the war, the Romans would pay the Persians a large annual sum in exchange for guarding the Caucasian mountain range, preventing any nomads from making incursions against the Roman Empire from there. In the east, the Hephthalites declined and began to constantly wage war on each other, freeing up the army to wage war against Rome over the province of Caucasian Iberia, which had defected to the Roman Empire. While this war was largely inconclusive, the important trend began of both sides hiring large numbers of Arab mercenaries. Kavad no longer needed the Mazdakites as much as he did in the past. He slowly distanced himself from them over the years. And later, his son Khosrow would execute Mazdak and many of his followers, who supported a rival Mazdakite claimant to the throne to succeed Kavad. Khosrow reinstituted the Orthodox Zoroastrian faith as the state religion, and the priesthood in return granted him the title Anushirawan, the immortal soul. Khosrow concluded a peace treaty with Rome that increased the amount of gold the Romans had to pay for protecting the northern Caucasian border. With the priesthood and bureaucracy now firmly supporting him, and with peaceful borders, Khosrow reformed the small powerful noble families. By decreasing their power and increasing the power of the Deccans, who were the minor landed nobility, personally loyal to the Shah and Shah, they became the empire's tax collectors, and served in the elite heavy cavalry units that were previously reserved for the members of the noble houses. There had previously only been one great general of the army. Khosrow made 4, each serving in a corner of the empire far from their ancestral homelands. With that accomplished, he reconquered the east, aligned with the Gurk-Turk Khaganate, in crushing the Hephthalites. After an initial peace for the first 8 years of his reign, Khosrow successfully campaigned against the Romans. Although he took little territory, he destroyed a great deal of Roman fortifications, extracted many large bribes to spare cities from destruction, and used that money to entice thousands of unpaid Eastern Roman soldiers into joining the Sassanian army. Khosrow's reign is considered by many to be the height of the Second Sassanian Golden Age, where Sassanian prosperity, culture, and learning reached a high point and spread far beyond its own borders. Khosrow's son, Hormizd IV, is noted for killing many of the nobility, and also dealing harshly with the priesthood. While he consolidated power at court, his general Bahram Chobin won a great victory over the Gurk Turks. He was then sent to Armenia, where he suffered a minor defeat against the Romans. The Shah and Shah then began to blame, slander, and shame his general for the defeat, which made the general nervous, given the Shah's predilection for executing members of the nobility. So he marched his army to the capital, and with the support of the nobles and priesthood, placed the Shah and Shah's son, Khosrow II, on the throne. The general Bahram Chobin then began to consolidate power and rule behind the throne. Khosrow, then fearing for his life, fled to Roman territory. He received the help of the Emperor Maurice, who supplied him with an army, which he used to march back to Ctesiphon and overthrow Bahram Chobin, who was of the house of Mihran. He was the first Shah and Shah of Iran Shah to not be a family member of the house of Sassan. With the borders of the empire secured, an eternal peace was signed between Rome and Persia, and with both emperors considering each other personal friends, it seemed a new age of peace and prosperity for both empires was just on the horizon. But it would not be, as Maurice was overthrown and executed in an army rebellion. Khosrow II vowed to avenge his dead friend, and began a lengthy war that devastated both empires. The Sassanids would conquer the Levant, Egypt, and much of Anatolia, before besieging Constantinople itself, bringing the empire to its greatest extent. After the Persians denied his several proposals for peace, the Emperor Heraclius then implemented a desperate strategy to save the Roman Empire, and attacked Mesopotamia with the bulk of his army, and defeated every army he encountered. Khosrow II was overthrown by his son, who executed him and then sued for peace with Rome, returning to both empires' previous borders. The empire was then consumed with a cavalcade of familial side and Palestinian intrigue, where no less than 14 different rulers sat on the throne in less than 4 years, which left the empire beleaguered and exhausted by the time of the Arab conquest, which occurred in rapid fashion. The Dabuid dynasty south of the Caspian Sea being the last remnant of the Sassanid Empire to remain unconquered for a few generations. While the succeeding caliphs, their families, and army replaced the Shah and Shah and the nobility, the bureaucracy was left largely intact, as it was a robust and efficient machine that had been fine-tuned over many centuries, with the Persian bureaucratic administration gaining a great deal of power throughout the Rashidun, Umayyad, and Abbasid caliphates, as they controlled the day-to-day workings of government and the finances of the empire, which over time adopted much of Persian culture as well, which you could watch my video on the history of Islamic Iran if you would like to learn more about that history. This has been Epimetheus. Big thanks to my supporters over on Patreon, where for just $1 a month you could help me create more content like this. I'm just one guy making these videos, and be sure to like and comment and subscribe, as that super helps me out and always motivates me to keep making new content. Thank you so much for watching.